Welcome. My name is Şebnem Şener. I am a senior SDG finance specialist in the Sustainable Finance Hub in UNDP, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this side event, co-hosted by the government of Spain and the INFF Facility. So as you all know, today's discussion is about integrated national financing frameworks. This has been a very busy week for all of us, and as we have been joining different events and hearing different people throughout the week, we are obviously thinking a lot about what has been achieved so far and what has been the challenges since the Addis Ababa Action Agenda in 2015. And of course, more exciting, we think more about the priorities and opportunities and what else we can achieve so far, looking ahead to the FFD Forum in Spain next year and leading to the next round of NDCs that is leading to COP30 next year. Integrated national financing frameworks were first introduced by the member states in 2015 at this agenda. And they have been arguably the most successful products of all. And today will be interesting because we are going to hear reflections from the countries who have been adopting or using the INFF approach and INFF framework for their financing strategies. And what will be interesting is to hear, different ways of using the INFF approach at the country level. We are also launching a report, which is very exciting, that takes stock of how it has moved forward, some of the emerging, outcomes of the INFF approach and INFFs in different countries at the country level and global level, and some of the recommendations that we are going to hear. We have got a full agenda today. I'm not going to talk too much. I'm going to dive straight in, and to kick us off, I'm going to invite Sergio. Oh, okay. The people who are at the back row, please welcome to the first row so we don't have empty seats from my boss next to me. So please do so. Sergio, sorry. Introduce Sergio Colina, DG, Director General for Sustainable Development Policy from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation. Sergio, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers, colleagues, friends for organizing this event and for having the opportunity to, first of all, say once again that Spain is very grateful for the support received from the UN member states to host next year the 4th Financing for Development Conference. We really look forward to it, and we really believe that the conference represents a great opportunity for the international community at large, all the actors engaged in sustainable development, to agree, to move forward on ambitious and politically feasible solutions to overcome some of the most pressing obstacles and challenges that are still preventing the effective implementation of the SDGs. And I think also the agenda on financing for development provides the broad umbrella, the multi-level, cross-cutting kind of agenda that can allow us to really have this conversation in an ambitious manner. I think that's the same spirit that embeds the initiative we are all talking about today, which is the INFFs. So following the Addis Ababa conference and also with the impetus of the Secretary General stimulus package, we have seen how integrated national financing frameworks have taken shape and taken speed, and also the way that they've been rooted in, I think, some 85 countries now. So over the years, we have seen their positive impact on countries' financing strategies, with the ability to lead to reforms and effective planning to mobilize all domestic resources needed to finance the SDGs. So let me underline, I think this is also this important potential to really be grounded and rooted in the ground, in the partner countries' strategies and ownership for sustainable development. On a national level, INFFs, we can ensure we all work to make that an interesting creative framework to ensure that all investments are really aligned with national priorities based on policy dialogue, and ensure that these investments really offer protection to population during crisis and provide long-term benefits, such as universal social protection, decent job creation, and lifelong learning programs. In this sense, I think we all agree that INFFs are prioritizing and should prioritize the integration of SDGs into national budget processes, mobilize and align fiscal policy with Agenda 2030, and orient public-private investments and financial market incentives towards sustainability goals as a powerful tool to really make possible the common goal to really implement the SDGs by the 2030 horizon that we all committed to in 2015. But they should also be able to connect with other global initiatives promoted by the UN, such as the Global Accelerator for Employment and Social Protection, etc. So just in order to be brief, please let me just signal a couple of ideas that I think are important for the strength and the long-term viability of the INFF as this collective bet in order to make this joint effort to really accelerate the implementation of the SDGs a reality. First of all, we believe that it is important to deepen localization perspective in all the work to implement SDGs, but therefore also in INFF. So we believe that it's important to favor a territorial approach that can really have an impact on social cohesion. And as you know, Spain is deeply committed with the localization agenda. We've been also hosting the new office of the Local 2030 initiative. And therefore, it is important for us to see how this approach that really allows to incorporate the local dimension to be effectively integrated into the INFFs. That means, of course, strengthening a multi-stakeholder approach based on dialogue involving all public actors, but at all levels of government, and of course also civil society, private sector, etc. That's the way we believe it can really show that it is what it's already been carrying out, which is like an effective tool for this very ambitious goal. It is also, we believe it's also important to use agreed measurements indicators that are able to go beyond GDP. So we can also really make reality a more integrated vision of sustainable development that goes just beyond macroeconomic indicators and that really tackles vulnerabilities, inequalities, etc. And of course, other topics that have been crossing conversations during these days at the forum. So just let me finish by saying that Spain believes that well-designed INFFs can really provide greater clarity on how best to use international resources. We are talking a lot about mobilizing resources, but it's important also to have the talk about how to use international resources. Effectiveness agenda will have to be also an important chapter of the discussions in Spain next year and on the conference on financing for development. And in that framework, INFFs we believe, can be really like a roadmap for all official creditors, including bilateral donors, IMF, multilateral development banks, etc., to coordinate their actions with an appropriate country-specific approach in order to really make Agenda 2030 a reality by the horizon we all defined collectively. So thank you for the opportunity and good work.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you for setting the scene, both at the global and national level, and your insights and touching upon some issues about localization and involving all stakeholders, which we are going to talk about throughout the whole session. Let me turn to Marcos for his opening remarks. Marcos Nito, Assistant Secretary General and Director of Bureau for Policy and Program Support. Welcome, Marcos.
Thank you, Chairman, and gracias, Sergio, por tus palabras y gracias por estar aquí. I met Sergio. He had, I don't know, 7 hours, 10 hours in his job. So I'm glad to see he survived the first 2 months. So welcome to New York. Listen, colleagues, for me personally, this is a very, very, very exciting moment. And some of us, come back to that point, started this process back in 2019 when nobody knew what an INFF was. Right? It was a paragraph in the IDES agenda, right? And some people took a chance on this. Why it matters? Because we are off track. We are halfway through the SDGs Agenda 2030. Only 12% of the targets of the SDG are on track. A lot are actually regressing. Some are stagnant. And finance, it is one of the reasons why the SDG is off track. Now, the odd part of this is it is not for lack of money that finance is a problem. There are $135 trillion of asset under management in capital markets. That $463 trillion is the size of the global wealth. 1% of global wealth is enough for the SDGs. A couple of percent is SDGs in Paris Agreement, right? So that's not the problem. Right? The problem is a misalignment of both public and private, public too, of flows of resources, both to the issues that matter for the SDG as well as to the geographies that need the most. Right? And I think the Secretary General, as Sergio mentioned on his stimulus, has pointed out to this and has put a number of $500 billion for us to come back, to put the SDG back on track. Dealing with issues of debt, debt, taxation, and other aspects. Now, the global stocktake on climate change that was presented last year at the COP28 and the UE consensus also points to finance as a problem, right, on advancing climate finance. So you've got climate finance and development finance, and maybe this is something we can work in the FFD4, at some point, they're never going to merge, but they need to converge, right? So I think there is an important element of understanding how climate finance and development finance are going to converge simply because you cannot fight poverty without fighting climate, you cannot fight climate without fighting nature, you cannot deal with gender, and so on and so forth. The agenda, as it was designed in the SDGs, is an integrated agenda. It's a holistic agenda. Now, and we're going to hear today, I'm delighted to have ministers from Ghana, Maldives, and other colleagues in here from countries. While all this confusion in the world is going on, and all of this, where is the money, and where is the $100 billion on climate is going on, countries can't stay still waiting for the international community to reform an international financial architecture that doesn't work, or it doesn't work as it should. So countries are making a move. And I think countries have found in the Integrated National Financial Framework and its modules and its methodology a friendly process to take charge, right? And to analyze in a participatory way, with civil society, with business, whole of government, very much led by finance ministers, which was always one of the things that we wanted to do with the INFF, make sure that it was not only led by planning or by environment, but led for finance. Because if the problem is money, who's got the money? It's the finance people, right? So having them, so the governments have gone and said, okay, let's keep on talking globally, but in the meantime, I'm taking charge. I am creating my financial plans for my policy priorities. Being the SDGs, 13 of the 86 countries have actually chosen to prioritize their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, right? So it is country on, as Sergio mentioned. I think that is a very, very important You know, is it the best financial plan in the world? I don't know. But it is owned by the countries. They believe in it. Maldives believe in it, which is one that has done on the NDC, on climate. Now, what can we say, and this is why I'm very happy for this, because it took 5 years and a pandemic in the middle for us to be able to say, is it working or not? And I'm delighted to say that it seems to be working, right? It seems to giving countries a power to do their financial planning. It seems to be giving countries the capacity to put a cost in their policy priorities, understand what is available publicly, domestic, international, public, private, international, and domestic. Thank you. And start making change, right? Huge reforms were identified. About 235 different areas of reform were identified across those 85 countries. What this report tells us, which I find it beautiful, is even when a country hasn't finished the financial strategy, it's not waiting for sequential approach. It's actually moving. And I think there are about 134 policy arenas that are moving, regardless if they finish the financing strategy or not. And those policies go everywhere, from PPPs to capital market, to taxation, to budget. It's really a massive endeavor in that sense. Now, the other thing that is working is the money is happening, right? Only, right, out of 17 countries that have finished the financing strategy, we already seen a leveraging of around $15 billion. And better, we've seen an alignment of around $36 billion. Now, Tom, maybe when you present, you can talk the difference between leverage and alignment so people understand why I'm using two different verbs here, right? But in all, in 17 countries only, in 3 years, we've actually seen a change in flows of resources to around, I'm not good at math, I'm a lawyer from training, even though I work on finance, go figure. About $50 billion. We think that if you extrapolate that to the whole 85 countries, that's a lot going on. Some of this money, and this is what is important, is domestic resource. It's the money that governments have the most control over, right? Others are international. We do know we have a problem. We do know that we made this point last week in the spring meetings, that LDCs and most developing countries today on aggregate are actually seeing a net outflow of resources. Between that payment, reduction of FDIs, more money are leaving developing countries than come in. And that is a problem. But it's also, necessity is the matter of invention. So countries are basically taking charge, using the INFFs and aligning their own money, because they can't wait for us in New York or in Washington or in Brussels, Auntie, to do the right thing. We should do the right thing, and I hope we will do the right thing. Now, as we look forward to Spain's leadership with the co-chairs on the FFD Forum, I want us to seriously consider that we need to recognize that out of a small paragraph, obscure in page whatever, of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, we've made into something. This is a success story. Ethiopia should be proud of it. So should be our colleagues at DESA, and I think we have an opportunity with Spain to recognize the success, and to double down, to put the INFF at the center of a country-owned, country-led financial planning for their policies priorities. We should also use the INFFs perhaps for things that they were not necessarily created, like the NDCs, because we need the NDCs to show up at COP30 in Brazil, the third generation of NDCs, fully aligned to 1.5 degrees, but investable, actionable, with a cost. Because, if we end up at 1.5, congratulations, but it's still on the paper. It will be the first time in history, but it's still on paper. So the implementation of the NDCs become very important, and the INFFs can contribute to that. Let me finish by thanking some visionaries, right? From an institutional point of view, the people that joined hands with us at UNDP back in 2019 were UNDESA, and I don't think there's anybody from DESA here, and was actually the European Commission. They were the visionaries that came back, and some countries. I think Ghana was an initial country. Sierra Leone was a pilot, we were called pioneer countries at the time. Nigeria was a pioneer country, right? So those of us had a vision. Now I'm proudly including myself in here. And I do want to mention two names. One from DESA, Navid Hanif, and one from the European Union, Felix Fernand Shaw. The three of us were like the triumvirate of an INFF going around these corridors talking about it, and nobody knew what we were talking about. My own boss, Achim Steiner, once looked at me and says, "Why are you inventing new acronyms? This is absurd." And I said, "Well, I didn't invent it. It's in the IDES agenda," right? So, and I do say that one of the things, Sergio, we can do in next year is change the name to something more marketable than INFFs. Very soon after that, we were joined for second wave of visionaries. Sweden, Italy, Spain, put resources behind. OECD, UNICEF, they join us, in the INFF Technical Assistance Facility. This is hard work, colleagues. When you start from something that nobody understands what you're talking about, and not even you understand what you're talking about, because I don't know we actually knew exactly what we're talking about, right? And you come 5 years down the line, and you are able to show 86 countries are doing this. They're taking charge. They own. It's about $50 billion moving. Sorry, but I got emotional. There's not many times in this life of bureaucrats that you can actually see things like that happen. It is not the panacea. It's not going to solve all the problems, right? But it's working. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. I'm not going to comment on anything. There's nothing to comment. Plus, I want to quote upon the time that that you ate. So, turning directly to the launch of the report, Tom, you'll find the copies, executive summary on your desks in different UN languages on the sides. Also, those of you who are online, you can go to inff.org and find the report and the executive summary. The aim of the report is, as you all know, the stock take of the experiences in the countries and consider some future opportunities and potential. So let me introduce you to Tom Bilo. He's the Acting Director of Sustainable Finance Hub, UNDP. And Tom, please, we are looking forward to hear from you about the key findings.
Thank you so much, Sebnem. I will be brief because, of course, you'll enjoy reading the report at your leisure, and also because I guess some of you may have had lunch and are therefore a little tired after lunch, or if you're like me, not had lunch and feeling a little woozy. So I'll be as quick as possible, and The final reason, of course, is we've got some fantastic presentations of the actual country experiences, and there's nothing more important than listening to that. So I've just got 5 or 6 slides, and the first is a sort of mathematical slide just to emphasize, as has already been said, 86 countries are taking forward integrated national financing frameworks. 13 have an operational strategy already. A further 26 will be operationalizing their strategies over the course of 2024. So it's moving, it's dynamic, and it's across the globe in different development contexts, some crisis, some small island developing states, least developed countries, middle-income countries. It's a tool that's being picked up across the board. And the most important point, which has been emphasized already, is it's sovereign. It is a sovereign financing plan. So if we move to the next slide, you'll see, I hope, or am I meant to move the slides? Or I will just, there it is, look at that, another set of numbers. And the point really behind this slide, and I'm not going to belabor it, is that, as has already been said, an integrated financing framework necessarily looks at financial reforms and instruments across all sources of finance. And that's what you can see there across the graph. The other point to make about these reforms is that countries aren't necessarily waiting to finalize their financing framework or financing strategy. We surveyed this figure of 264 last year in 2023, and you'll see more than half are already being taken forward. So they were statements of intent in 2023, but actual reform processes in 2024. So it's moving, and it's moving fast. So if we move to the next slide, the report is full of brilliant examples of reforms, transactions, and systemic change taking place at the country level, which we'll hear more from our colleagues. But just to say, really, one of the features, if you read the report, that you'll see is that in all cases, transactions are being linked to systemic reform. And that's sort of linking the sexy, cool stuff of, leveraging, mobilizing new money with the hard graft of taking forward institutional reforms, changing the way in which decisions are made around finance, bringing new data to those decisions. So it's linking transactions with systems reform. And there's an example in Colombia that's there where the government put in place a system to track the alignment of their budget with the SDGs, and over the period of 3 years saw an increase of investment in the SDGs from $58 billion to $68 billion of finance. A systemic reform aligning resources with the SDGs. There are other transactions. We had a session yesterday linking integrated national financing frameworks and the issuance of SDG bonds, thematic debt. And we heard from Indonesia and Mongolia how they had issued debt, in Indonesia's case, over the years to the tune of $10 billion of SDG and green bonds. But as they did that, they also took forward public financial management reforms to make it easier to track use of proceeds in their budget. In Mongolia, they put in place a sustainable finance taxonomy to regulate the market and make it easier to identify sustainable investment in the private sector. Again, transactions linked to systemic reforms. On the right there, you'll see an example from Thailand, where in the context of the integrated national financing framework, the Securities and Exchange Commission has put in place regulation around the stock market and reporting of companies listed on the stock market. And there is an effort to the tune of $90 billion of market capitalized private sector organizations to increase the alignment of their investment with the SDGs. It's work in motion, but it's systemic again, and looking at large pools of capital in Thailand. There are multiple examples. I'm not going to bore you with listing more of them, but do read the report. And if you go to the next slide, a really important element of the Integrated National Financing Framework coming out from the report is quite how embedded in institutional change the INFFs are. I think a number of countries are looking at the administrative arrangements in ministries of finance, bringing in new units to look at sustainability within the decision-making of ministries of finance, climate finance units, sustainable finance units in some countries. So there's administrative reform taking place within ministries of finance. Trade-offs and synergies are being focused on in ways that non-integrated approaches to finance do not enable. Looking, for example, across fiscal policies, tax and expenditures, and the trade-offs and synergies between those tax policies and expenditure policies. Difficult decisions are being brought to light. And very important to that is the financing dialogues that are linked to integrated national financing frameworks, bringing new stakeholders, civil society, the private sector, actors who don't normally get the opportunity to discuss financing options and financing strategies. But as part of the INFF, in many countries, CSOs and the private sector are engaged in new ways around financial decision-making. I'm not going to go to the sexy figures because we've heard about those before, but they're significant and it's still in motion. The final slide, I hope, for your sake, are 3 recommendations that are coming out. And there are, I think, 10 recommendations in the report for the FFD process. It's a very timely report in that sense. The first and the most important is the recommendation to look to ways to reinforce country leadership on financing as part of this endeavor. As we look at the supply and demand, investors looking for markets and developing economies trying to put those markets in place, we have to ensure that sovereign states retain the leadership of the prioritization of their financing options and reforms. So that's the first. The second has already been mentioned. It's a unique time with the scaling up of NDCs. We hope at their ambition being scaled up next year. Let's not lose the opportunity to link integrated national financing frameworks and more ambitious NDCs. And finally, whilst I've mentioned the new ways of looking at inclusion within financial decision-making and the dialogues around INFFs, without a doubt, there's more that can be done to strengthen inclusion and engagement, and we must pursue that if these are to be successful in their maturity. With that, I pause, and thanks for the opportunity to present the report.
Thanks, Tom. I think you encouraged everyone to read. Everybody will read the full report after these interesting mathematical presentation. So we'll now move to the panel discussion. We have a large panel with us today. We are going to reflect both on country experience and the scale of support through the INFF facility with partners from civil society and core partners to the INFF facility. So I'll introduce the full panel first, and then we'll start. So on my right third seat, His Excellency Ahmed Mazin, Minister of State for Finance from Maldives. My left, Her Excellency Abna Oseya Sare, Minister of State for Finance, Ghana. Shari Spiegel, Acting Director, Financing for Sustainable Development.
She's not acting.
Okay, sorry, it's my notes. Sorry, Tim. I have to call out your name.
Together.
Peter Nuyaba Sempakra, Development Secretary, Minister of Planning and Economic Development, Sierra Leone. Karsten Starr, Chair of the Development Assistance Committee, DAC, OECD. My dear colleague, Oria Goni, Global Chief, UNICEF, Public Finance and Local Governance. And Mr. Rishet Bade, Commissioner for External Finance, Tanzania. and Mr. Luca Da Fraia, Deputy Secretary General, ActionAid Italia. So let me start by Maldives. Marcos also mentioned Maldives in his speech. Maldives was the first SIDS country to launch a financing strategy using the INFF. It was also the first country who linked the INFF to their NDCs. And I think you launched a gender-responsive climate financing strategy last year, which is mentioned in the INFF report. So in your experience, since the financing strategy was launched, how is the implementation advancing, and what are the main key outcomes you start to see that are emerging, and what are the priorities for the future?
Thank you. Moderator, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here today. As we all know, Maldives itself as a nation of low-lying islands is acutely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and increasing temperatures threaten our very existence. These existential threats underscores the urgency of integrating comprehensive climate action into every aspect of our development planning. Nearly 75% of all our national critical infrastructure lie within 100 meters of the coastline, be it an airport, or public housing, or a school. All infrastructure in the Maldives need to account for climate adaptation and mitigation, which incurs a disproportionately higher cost for a small country like ours, especially for a crisis not of our own making. Needless to say, the domestic resources we generate are not sufficient to meet this disproportionate cost of adapting to climate change. But the country is trying to move the needle on climate finance by moving every penny at our disposal. In March 2023, with the support of UNDP, we took a significant step forward by endorsing our integrated national financing framework, which is INFF, as a national document. This framework, which is the first of its kind for a small island developing state, not only links directly to our nationally determined contribution, but also embodies our commitment to sustainable and inclusive financial planning. At the recent COP29, His Excellency President Dr. Mohammad Muiz reiterated the Maldives' unwavering commitments to combating climate change. He pledged significant national efforts towards sustainable energy with aims to install renewable energy systems that can meet 33% of the country's electricity demand within the next 5 years. This ambitious project requires funding of at least $600 million, highlighting the critical need for robust financial strategies and international cooperation in our climate action plans. Our INFF outlines 16 policy priorities with 127 actions aimed at converting significant challenges into actionable opportunities. These include transitioning away from a fossil fuel-dependent economy, enhancing our resilience through sustainable investments in climate adaptation and mitigation. Since its launch, we have prioritized areas as fossil fuel subsidy reforms, which have been proposed in our national budget submission to Parliament with assistance from the UNDP. We have implemented SDG budget tagging to enhance transparency in how public funds are directed towards achieving sustainable development goals. To attract investments, particularly technologies that mitigate climate impact, we are extremely reforming our financial systems to align with global ESG principles. These reforms include the development of ESG frameworks for our sovereign, corporate, and banking sectors. These steps are vital for our continued progress toward bridging the climate finance gaps. A critical component of our strategy is the establishment of a sustainable finance hub at the Ministry of Finance. This initiative will not only facilitate the mobilization of substantial climate finance resources, but also explore innovative financing structure like blended finance to maximize the impact of available funds. Our INFF also integrates gender consideration across its objectives, recognizing the uneven impact of climate change on the most vulnerable segments of society and ensuring that our adaptation and mitigation strategies empower all community members to participate in and benefit from our climate actions. The Maldives is doing its part. It's a proactive approach to integrating climate consideration into our national financing frameworks sets a precedent for other nations, demonstrating that through unity, innovation, and resilience, sustainable development is indeed within our reach. I wish to express my profound gratitude to the UNDP and all our development partners for their unwavering support in this ambitious endeavor. The path forward is challenging, but with continued collaboration and stronger commitments to end the climate emergency, we can ensure the Maldives and SIDS are able to adopt and mitigate against the effects of climate change. We call on development banks and our international partners to ensure financing is available at a rate that speaks to transitional justice at the heart of the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Let me turn to Ghana. Her Excellency Minister of State for Finance, Abnosai Asare. Ghana was the pioneer INFF country. And it's interesting because Ghana was the first one that adopted a local approach, and which shows the adaptability of INFF framework. And we know that government is now building on the experience and coming up to the national level of developing the financing strategy. So we are curious to hear your experience and some of the outcomes that have been achieved so far. And how do you think this will help the ministry building on this local experience and bringing it to the national level? And what do you see as priorities and how do you think it will be helpful?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us this platform to showcase the story of Ghana. And I must say that the achievement of these SGDs requires us to be strategic in the mobilization of our resources. And in this, we have to be prudent with the management of our resources as well as block the leakages and to enable us achieve the financing that we need and to help us implement the SGDs. I must say that, like you mentioned, Ghana was one of the pioneer countries. We believed that the friendly process to align both the public and the private funding was to come through the Integrated National Financing Framework, the INFF. And so with this, we saw it as a useful tool that serves as a prompt and guide, not to only assess the status of our development finance, but also as a tool for prioritizing what needs to change in the sourcing and utilization of development resources. And so as part of this, the building blocks that we have used and we believe is still working for us is that of leadership. Leadership that facilitates institutional coherence leadership that has a clear vision for results, a leadership that has strategic financing policy, strong monitoring, evaluation, and learning system, and an enabling environment for accountability and dialogue. For us in Ghana, a number of these building blocks were already in place. We had begun the process of the SGD budgeting. We've also, which enabled us to map the budget allocations and expenditures to government policy priorities. Again, recently, Cabinet has given Ministry of Finance the go-ahead to set up a climate financing division that we believe will coordinate the activities in that regard very well and help us align to make it fit for purpose. Distinguished guests, the changing development finance landscape and our fiscal decentralization drive, coupled with the need to ensure citizen participation in the developmental process, informed the decision to adopt a bottom-up approach for delivering on the INFF. Our bottom-up approach to delivering the INFF targeted citizens directly at the local level of governance and puts the SGDs at the heart of the local government financing. And so we ensured that the metropolitan, the municipal, and district assemblies play a central role in financing and implementing the SGDs. We asked them to own the process, and the frameworks developed at the sub-national levels have become the first step towards the development of an INFF at the national level. And for us, the integrated financing framework at the assembly level, also christened the International Integrated Assembly Financing Framework, has enabled the assemblies to identify the various innovative sources of funding and raise additional resources required for development. The IAFF also promoted policy coherence, strengthened institutional capacity, identified and addressed gaps in the resource mobilization, and assisted the assemblies as they sought to implement key activities around our Ghana Cares program. The Ghana Cares program is an initiative to build on immediate actions taken immediately after the COVID-19. And so the assemblies are helping us implement this, because we believe that Ghana Cares program at the assembly level will be instrumental in the advancement of initiatives such as the Assembly Diaspora Development Partnership Initiative, the SGD's investor maps, and the SGD's investment fair, all aimed at mobilizing both public and private funds and investment for development at the local level. And so we are looking to partner with the Ghana UNDP office to advance this work started on the diaspora partnerships. The diaspora partnership was a key outcome of the process at the sub-national level. So distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we've also commenced processes towards the development of the framework at the national level, with the development of a development finance assessment, the DFA. As with all INFF processes, the DFA will be subjected to extensive consultation, which will involve both national and sub-national level processes. And with the support of the UNDP country office, we hope to complete our DFA by October. We know we are not there yet, but we are still moving on and hoping to make progress. It's our sincere belief that our DFA will show the lessons and experiences from the national level and help us to achieve the objective. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. Allow me now to introduce the chair of OECD Development Assistance Committee, Mr. Carsten Starr. And Mr. Starr, so as chair of DAC, you work closely with development partners on issues on such as development effectiveness, country ownership, and alignment of cooperation at the country level. And we already heard about the experiences from two countries and how financing agendas are driven by the INFFs. So the question is, how can development partners respond to these? And do you see opportunities that the development partners actually can adapt their support to the developing economies based on their evolving needs?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And when I was given the task of, you have 4 minutes and you have to address making finance work for people and planet, my initial reaction was just to say, let us all pray and then keep silent after that. But having heard these introductions, I think I'm a bit more optimistic in that sense, that there's a lot of things to do. And let me say, first of all, that INFF is a real, and I agree with Marcus on that one and others, Tom, that this is a real game changer in many ways, that the potential here is not fulfilled, of course, as it should be, but it's in a good progress, and can be leveraged, I think, politically when we come to approach FFD Forum. So very pleased to see the progress, the 86 countries, and I think that the whole notion, the idea, and the concept is reaching maturity from which it can grow even more, and I think that for me is the main part here. Okay, donor countries come into this in many ways. ODA, I present the donor community, $224 billion in ODA last year. It has a lot of purposes, and I've tried to spend my time here in New York explaining on some of these purposes. But part of that, and I think a significant, a key part of that, is ODA to help countries drive reforms. And that is somehow at the very center of the potential of ODA. And in that context, when Tom says that linking transaction to systemic reform, that is exactly where ODA comes in. Not only ODA, but where ODA do have a key role to play. That intersection between mobilizing finance, setting policy priorities, I think that's where you can see ODA coming in and align with the concept of INF and the notion of leadership. I was involved in development cooperation many years ago around the Paris Principles in 2005 and Accra and Busan later on. And there was a lot of enthusiasm around development effectiveness and the effectiveness principles. That has then subsided slightly, and we have moved to maybe another sort of concept and entry point into thinking about ODA. But I do think that the time may be now mature enough to basically come back to some of these effectiveness discussions and principles. And we need to look much more into the issue of country ownership, alignment around policy priorities, and country leadership. We have seen a growing share of ODA being invested outside of budget and outside of government partners over recent years. And I think time has come to discuss that and to see whether we have to reverse that. It's a difficult issue. There's a number of political considerations in this, but I do think that is important. And especially when we take on board also the climate action or the climate challenge. Marcus said, and I slightly disagree on that, in terms of that climate finance and development finance are not going to merge, but to converge. This is really UNE's language, but it's beautiful. But I think that when you look at it at country level, actually it has to merge. The two buckets are different, political processes are different, but when you look at it also in this context here, there's one Ministry of Finance, there's one system, there's one set of policies, and should be in the country, that can actually merge the sources of finance. And in order to optimize foreign input and domestic input. What ODA can do is can help drive reforms. It can, and we talked this morning about capacity development and institution building, which is a very important part of that. It can also help mobilize capital. I acknowledge that we haven't been as successful as was set out in Addis 10 years ago to actually create a breakthrough of more massive mobilization of private finance. There are a number of obstacles to that, and we need to analyze it carefully and see what we can do about it. Some of these obstacles are in donor countries themselves, or in rich countries themselves. Others are in partner countries. But we need to get, I think, more granularity on that issue in order to do that. But I think there's a great potential in order to look at this from the macro perspective and see what we could do in order to make things happen. And capital will be key, and finance will be key to success. And I fully acknowledge that we have seen setbacks in developing countries over recent years. Go back to 2019, the 18-19, the first few years of the SDG is an upward trajectory, not so much anymore. And we need to come back on that more positive trajectory. We have lost some years, that's quite obvious. It may be difficult to get them back, but basically we need to come back to an upward trajectory. For that we need finance, and we need I think we are doing good in terms of boosting some of the capacities of the IFIs and the MDBs. I think we're doing fairly well on ODA so far, and as I mentioned several times this week, that we actually seen take out COVID, take out indonor refugee cost, take out Ukraine. There's still a positive trajectory of ODA over the past 5 years. And we have to politically to build up and mobilize so that that can continue. But of course, we also need the private sector. And we need to overcome some of the obstacles there, and we need to make it attractive. And part of that discussion is not only about looking at from a project risk point of view and in terms of mobilizing private capital, but also very much from a country risk point of view. And that, I think, has become much clearer right now, that is what we have to do. And that's, again, where all the reforms that we can drive at will come in and be helpful in mobilizing private capital. So I think we hopefully in a good trajectory. My final remarks very positive on the whole concept here and on INFF, and we, I think OECD, been in part of the process, part of the way, but we're really wanting to continue down this road. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to Mr. Rishet Bade from Tanzania. And Tanzania is using the INFF approach in a slightly different way. You are using INFF approach to support the third five-year development plan, which will cost, I think, $45 billion US, and 1/3 of it will come from the private sector, which is very interesting to hear for me. So can you tell us about how you're using INFF, or how INFF will help you to find some innovative ways to unlock both private and public finance for your five-year development plan?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to speak, and for me, having heard from all these people, I feel like there's a lot to talk about with the integrated national financing framework. And as asked to speak about Tanzania experience, and particularly the questions you asked, I started looking at the topic itself. Topic itself tells a lot, saying making finance work for the people and planet. And most of the time, we've been looking for it to work for the people because it's never worked like that before. So we need to see that it works for everyone. Then on top of it, we also need to be careful in making sure that the financing is working for the planet. And I think the testimonies that we've had from various people here tells that, yeah, every country is now really cautious about the planet, particularly the climate. So I think the topic is very fit for this. So I'll start with saying that in most of the developing countries, there's been a mislink between the national development plans and the financing and financial resources needed to achieve them. And that is the key issue with this integrated national financing framework. I think for me, if you ask me, what has it done to Tanzania? This is exactly that. That for the first time, we managed to link what we desire in the five-year development plan and what we can source to achieve our desires. So in the process of developing INFF, the government of Tanzania and the UNDP collaborated to develop and implement the development finance assessment, DFA first, and later on it became a financing strategy, which we adopted in 2021. And through the development finance assessment, or DFA, we mapped out all the traditional and not so traditional financing pathways, and including innovative ways of funding our development plan. So we look at domestic revenue resources, non-traditional domestic resources, external grants, which were traditionally we used to receive grants and some concessional loans, but we looked at external borrowing, both concessional and non-concessional, a climate change fund, which was quite a new addition, domestic savings. We've been hearing here that some of the time we were just looking outside, but there's a lot that is, if you align well, you can find that the money is even available domestically. So domestic savings, bank financing, private and public partnership, venture capital, corporate bonds, private equity, and all those sorts. So we mapped out with the support of UNDP. We mapped out when we were creating now the development finance assessment and finally the strategy. So I would say that the key milestones of the INFF process in Tanzania include the realization of the alignment between the planning and financing concepts. And we've had a few testimonies here that's purely the key or the core concept of INFF. So our last 5-year development plan came up with a financing strategy all together, marked together. You mentioned about 45, it was actually $49 billion. 65% of it is marked to come from the private sector. So since 2021, when we adopted INFF, there have been significant reforms in the financing of the government development plans. So this is including our need to go for the credit rating, and indeed that one we achieved that, and now the country is rated for the first time, and very recently we all know that Moody's have recently upgraded the rating from B2 to B1 with a stable outlook. So it's one of the key milestones out of the INFF that we've been working together with the UNDP and other partners. And in 2002, we managed to establish crowdfunding guidelines for capital markets and securities. Also, we established corporate bond issuance guidelines and formulated alternative project financing strategies. So all these were achieved under the INFF. And I would probably like to mention a few key success that out of this, and for the first time, the government and public investment has managed to access key private capital. And this including last year, one of our bank, CRDB, goes by the name of CRDB Bank, with the support of IFC, managed to issue a green bond. And it was one of the kind in Africa there. And this is a very key, this definitely results or the outcome of INFF. Other than that, we also, with the support of IFC, IFC managed to do some kind of credit enhancement, and another bank called the National Microfinance Bank managed to issue a gender-based bond. This is to target funding for the women empowerment, because there was no anything like that in the market, and that was issued, and it was very successful. That was a $100 million ticket. So this is one of the key achievements. But very recently this year, one of the local town council, which is a water utility, managed to do a social bond, and it worked very well. And this is a quasi supported, but they managed to do that and raise about $50 million to do the investment on water and waste management. So that's also out of the INFF. Apart from that, because also we have other partners that we've been doing along the way, because we have now a set of framework that we worked on. We have been doing rural electrification projects with the support of World Bank. This is some of these are off-grid solar power projects, and in that sphere, we've been encouraging private sector to jump in and invest in that. And because of some risks, we have managed to work out with the World Bank through IDA financing to do kind of a blended financing and open up for private sector, and it's working very well. So we've got quite a number of private sector getting into that business through the borrowing from commercial bank, which is the rate is down because it's blended with the IDA financing. But again, with the help of, with the cooperation with the federal government of Germany, we have an agreement in place where it's a performance-based grant. If one of the, we work out the, some of the public SOEs. So we target mainly the water utilities and water utility companies. They can access, if they can manage to prove they can access funds from the commercial banks, they're getting grants. It's a performance-based grant. So that grant end up blending the rates that they can access from the commercial bank into a very affordable way, and it's been working very well. A number of water utilities have been benefiting of that. But apart from that, on this blending finances, which is quite new in the government, we've been very closely working with the UNDP country office to map up all the possible areas or opportunities that can be used, along with mapping the SDG investors to see how we could capitalize on that. Those are kind of few things that are already on the ground are working, and we're very happy with this, because if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't be talking about this now. But looking ahead, some of the things that are on the board now, some of them have been mentioned here. We are establishing a climate finance unit, and this is working for the planet. So, and this is under me. I'm quite busy making sure to, I establish the climate finance unit. I'll go to Agassi. We'll definitely go to him to help. Yeah, so we're establishing climate finance unit to make sure that we're coordinating all the different opportunities and different things that we could do under the climate finance, so that the finance can work for the planet. Also, on the carbon footprint, we're working on to establish a way of measuring and finally trading with a carbon credit, and that's again is one of the main things that we are hoping will happen. Others including a green taxonomy and tax for SDG 13, which is the climate change. Already we're trying to identify some areas where we could raise money to support the climate change mitigations. So it is quite a hefty, but we are progressing well there. On your other parts, I know I'm over time. This is the last point. On the other point that you asked for the for subnational, we have Zanzibar, which is kind of semi-autonomous, and there we are doing sustainable quasi sovereign bond framework. It's just a framework. We're also doing SDG investors map and Zanzibar local digital revenue collection system. So we're very confident that things are working. And sorry that I've spent more than 7 minutes. I thought I would spend less. Thank you.
Sherry, I'll turn to you very quickly. So you and DESA obviously developed the methodology and maintain it, adapt to different sectors, climate, health, also different contexts, LDC. So basically it's the brain, high efficient processing power, I think, behind the INFF. But can you tell us how you see the development of INFFs to date and what role they can play moving forward?
Thank you so much, and I'll try to be brief, and thank you for having us here. And especially be brief because we've heard so many really excellent comments from around the table. And I think the examples, the country examples, are really the story behind what they are doing and what they can do. So from our side, I just want to note, as and I sort of mentioned this morning as well, that as you know, INFFs were thought out and put forward in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda in 2015, and it's a very opportune time to be looking at how the progress has been, especially as we move towards the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which will be held in Spain in 2025 next year. And so really hearing this really great progress that's been going on in countries and INFFs, and to really take stock of what we've learned and how to move forward, this is really a time to do it. As I mentioned this morning, the financing for development agreements have always been an agreement between the national and the global. And in every chapter of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, there are national actions and global actions. And whereas the conference in Spain is mandated to look at international financial architecture questions, that's impossible to do without thinking about where that lands on the ground and what are the policies put in place on the ground to make that the updated international financial architecture actually work for people in countries. And so I'll very quickly note that that there are a few areas, and I've noticed this really when working, and last week in the DC discussions, in almost every conversation we had, no matter what policies we were talking about, and whether one was talking about, and especially in development cooperation issues, whether one was talking about country platforms or all of the different, ultimately it all comes down to what is the country's plan. And does the country have a plan to be able to share with their donors and their partners to really make sure that the money goes to these questions of development effectiveness and country ownership? And I think one of the areas to think forward to the 4th conference is to think about the issues you mentioned, development effectiveness. I think it's time to have that conversation. What does it mean in this new world of increased systemic risks and climate, et cetera? And again, one of the ways to do this is to make sure that country ownership and country priorities are at the core of these conversations. I think this issue is particularly important when we talk about something like blended finance. So when you talk about bringing the public and private sector together, if the MDBs and if development partners only have number goals, then we know of quantities. We know where that money is going to go, and it's going to go to the richest countries, the richest developing countries, to deals that are the easiest to put in, that are going to be the most profitable. Those are in some of the richest countries, but also they are going to be in the areas, the sectors, et cetera, that may not be the country's priorities. They're going to be where the private finance deals can be done the easiest, especially if we think about putting a guarantee on a structure. So you put a guarantee on the structure, somebody takes a first loss, and then the private sector goes out and finds the deals that they want to invest in using that guarantee. They're going to go to their areas that are the most interesting to them, which will not necessarily be his priorities. And so we have to find a new way to make sure that this money is going to where the countries think the priorities are most important. And I say this when in 2015, when we started talking about blending finance, we had almost what we called a blended finance train and plane, because we went from New York to DC to Paris, back to New York to DC to Paris. And what the private investors said at the time was, well, country ownership, We don't want the state anywhere near what we're doing. We want to have our own, we don't want to be working with governments. And so we need to rethink completely how do we do this in a way that makes sure that the countries are in the driving place with scarce ODA and with scarce concessional resources. And INFFs is a really a tool that countries can use to try to make sure that this is aligned. So these are some of the things that I think we're thinking of, and with all of you together, to bring to FFD4 to really highlight what an INFFs can do. Finally, I'll say that this is important, as I mentioned, the issue of country platforms. I think we do need to bring the entire system around this tool to really socialize it across the system beyond, to bring everyone together to work on this together. And finally, just to say that UNDESA is very happy and honored to be proud to be working with all of you around the table, and particularly with the facility, with all of our partners. So thank you again, and thanks for having us come give some comments.
Thanks, Sherry. Turning to Sierra Leone, Peter, as it was said, Sierra Leone has been using the INFF approach for a number of years. And can you tell us your experience, how it helped the ministry to strengthen financing for national policy priorities in Sierra Leone?
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Indeed, you're very right. Sierra Leone has used the INFF approach since 2020, when our integrated national financial framework was developed. As part of the immediate outcomes of producing the INF, the government, UNDP, and UNSCDF quickly secured catalytic fund to commence the implementation of the framework, the joint SDGs funds project on strengthening domestic resource mobilization. That was the first outcome we received as a project. As National SDGs Fund Steering Committee was established to oversee project implementation and provide strategic guidelines to the overall domestic revenue mobilization effort. As an INF coordinating structure, the committee provided technical advice to the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development on how the key financing measures articulated in the country's medium-term national development plan. Through the implementation of this INF project, national capacity for revenue generation has improved, leading to increased domestic revenue generation. We have also witnessed improved financial inclusion, digitization, and financial literacy. This is helping in the area of funds predictability, thereby informing national development prioritization. The capacity of local councils to effectively mobilize local revenue has been enhanced, and advocacy on tax compliance intensified both at the local and the central level. In addition, to strengthen revenue mobilization, the INFF approach in Sierra Leone has enhanced the national planning process and prioritization of needs through the following. One, we ensure integrated planning at all levels in the delivery of public services for the optimal optimization of resources. Two, we have automated revenue collection and expenditure and management system. And three, established public-private collaboration platforms. In the preparation of our current medium-term national development plan for the period 2024-2030, let me just elaborate on what our medium-term national development usually is a 5 years period, but this particular plan is for 7 years period for obvious reasons. You know, the SDG is coming to an end in 2030. When we came here in September last year, our acceleration roadmap for the achievement of SDG was for 7 years. So it was good enough for us to actually align the, instead of 5 years SDG, National Development Plan, we do the 7 years so that we are reporting on the implementation of SDG is implementing National Development Plan as well. That's why we make it 7 years for you, the listener. The INFF instrument and coordination architecture proves to be a valuable tool in mapping the resources of financing for the plan and defining available resources through projected domestic revenue, partners commitment channel, through projects and programs, and estimating a funding gap. The new plan, unlike the previous one, is highly prioritized, and it has estimated funding gap of $2.5 billion for 7 years period. The framework has supported the broadening of the tax base through formalization of the informal sector and extended the social security scheme and the informal sector. Going forward, ladies and gentlemen, We know that resource mobilization cannot entirely be dependent on public resources, especially when the macroeconomic fundamentals are challenged. We will strengthen the implementation of the Sierra Leone Integrated National Financing Framework of scaling the Funds Steering Committee into an INFF Technical Committee for the overall technical coordination and guidelines, and 2, an INFF Steering Committee at ministerial and at cabinet level. This is not something about technical, but at the highest level. That's how we're going to integrate it. In 2023, through the INFF initiative, we completed key 2 studies. 1, assessing diaspora investment potential in Sierra Leone to look beyond remittances, focusing on diaspora bonds and other investment options. I mean, we have a whole lot of our colleagues out there. I mean if you see what you meet, we need to capture that one as part of financing our plan. The second, undertaking the SDG investor mapping to inform the government and partners on the sectors that can be prioritized for increased private sector investment. This, again, was done in collaboration with UNDP. So an investor can come, where investment opportunities are available and so forth. These studies are available, and it's helping us to attract other investors also. The outcome of these studies are currently guiding strategies to scale up financing for the SDGs in the country. To address the fiscal financial challenges in the new plan, the government of Sierra Leone will adopt innovative financial instruments, including leveraging climate finance-related opportunities. We will scale up efforts to harness the country's blue economic potential, explore the possibility of leveraging climate finance, leveraging international public finance, including transition and adaptation financing for climate change. The Blue Economic Strategy prescribes several climate finance-related instruments, such as the Blue Bond, the Green Bond, initiatives such as carbon sequestrations. We believe that optimizing this climate finance mechanism will be crucial in advancing the country's climate resilience, energy transition, and sustainable food system agenda. As I conclude, let me join other speakers in the past 2 days by calling for fairer and more transparent deals as we venture into the climate finance frontier. We will require capacity support to enable us to create account monetize our national carbon estate. I will not end this day by referring to Fred. Fred is here with us. Fred is one of the people we have met, actually helping us in this blue economic strategy we have, because we have a lot of potential and so forth. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to speak on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much. Oria, I can turn to you. You are, as part of the INFF facility, you're engaging with financing for social sectors mainly. So I'm just curious to hear what are the key elements you see emerging and priorities for the future, especially when it comes to effective investment in social sectors.
Thank you so much. And I want to start by thanking the previous speakers for enlightening us on, all this landing of this old theory at country level. And this is what the INFF is the opportunity that governments use and should use to bring us together, to provide support to you, and to provide a coherent approach, the UN system as a whole. And it was beautiful how Commissioner based in Tanzania was referring to that blended finance modality with the IDA funding integrated into the bigger picture of the INFF work. And I must underline this because it sounded, music to our ears in our current world. So as UNICEF, I have to say we proudly joined the INFF Facility in last year, 2023. But we've been working at country level, providing that the social sector spending approach, right, and working through the budgets and prioritizing key social sectors. At the end is the aim, right? Connecting those finance reforms to development outcomes, and development outcomes that have to do with the key aspects of the SDGs. The prioritization of gender-related aspects, the climate agenda, but also bringing forward the health, the education, the social protection, the WASH, etc. All the SDGs that have to come with it, right? And this is what the UNICEF is bringing to the table, and this is what in the remaining financing strategies that have to be developed, as the working groups consultations happen at country level, it is important to underline the need to consider all the social sector spending and social sector areas. A few examples have been shared already, but it's UNICEF role the need to stress those social sectors that obviously protect and expand the rights of the children at country level. So messages to share is that intention to make sure that we join forces with our UN partners, with development partners on the ground to provide support to you as you develop those financing strategies. The other message is making sure that the NDCs crowd in social sectors. There is the whole agenda on, how do we repurpose and make sure that if we invest in infrastructure, we dedicate that funding support to education, to schools and hospitals, and how can we repurpose these for other social needs or social spending needs. So how can we make sure that, the green agenda crowds in social spending? The other point I wanted to make is the local level, right? And we heard Sierra Leone and Ghana were key champions on local level financing. This interesting approach of bringing private sector investment through diaspora support. This is an area that is obviously coming through. There is a clear demand on fiscal decentralization, the whole devolution process. It hasn't happened yet in many countries, and there is a need to work there at that level. We have a key actor, which is Spain, that is working and prioritizing these two areas, the financing for development and local 2030, and there is a lot to share. And today, this morning, we were talking about not only bringing that technical assistance, but thinking about generating the knowledge transfer between countries. And here also I want to bring the perspective of South-South and triangular cooperation. When we work at national and subnational level, there is plethora of information and good practices, as far as I know, from the sub-Saharan African countries that I was covering with my previous hat, that are ready to be shared and to be scaled up. And this is what we need to do, starting from the local level. And this is what the INFF can bring and can help scale up. And the last point is the whole of society. Consultations process needs to happen. There is the traditional counterparts that are normally consulted at national level when the financing strategies are being developed. We want to bring also the sector level constituency, right? The civil society that is more knowledgeable of the health needs, the education needs, the WASH needs. So how can we all bring together those stakeholders? And last point is just to bring that additional spice, in addition to the climate finance and development finance. There is another element that we need to think of, and that's the humanitarian and fragile financing, right? Just to make the point, at country level, countries, as we were saying, this is finance. So we need to see how, within development partners, we bring coherence to that humanitarian and fragile financing approach. And with this, I want to thank you all for the opportunity.
Thanks, Aurea. So we'll finally close the panel with some reflections from the civil society side. Luca. So INFF is a promise for a platform for a more innovative and inclusive finance. So we heard the report that there are 50 countries. They have financing dialogues over the last year, including both civil society and the private sector. So from the perspective of the civil society, that you're engaged both at the global level and local level in these discussions, what is the opportunity for the INFFs, and what are the risks? What are the key things that we have to keep in mind to keep finance more inclusive?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Well, we're coming to the close of the meeting, so I'm going to keep myself as short as possible. And the first comment from my point is definitely this meeting, the survey, the findings are taking this discussion to another level. We have evidence, we have a body of evidence we can welcome, we can review, and we can challenge. That's our job. But definitely, we have evidence. We have been asking for evidence for quite some time, so now we have this body of findings. And let me note that CSOs have been watching the INFFs from nearly the start, I must say, and I remember some informal conversation with Mr. Shaw, online conversations, because I think it was about the time of COVID-19. So we started a few years back, and we started publishing our small reports on INFFs in 2021. So we've been doing our best to follow the process. Why? Why so? Because at least from the community working on effectiveness, we acknowledged from the start that this might be, or will be a game changer. So anything I heard today about quality, country's leadership is really, really music to our ears. But as I said, we have evidence that we're going to study, review, and challenge as much as we can. So definitely, from the start, we know that there's a huge potential. Also, we noticed from the start that there might have been a risk of duplicating, creating new layers. You remember this conversation. So now we're happy, I can say we're happy to notice that it is clear that INFF is an approach that countries can implement as they like. In doing so, however, we have developed 3 benchmarks that we would like to use in reviewing, challenging evidence. Some of these benchmarks are pretty known to some of you because, luckily enough, we have been discussing this together for the past few years. So the 3 benchmarks are the following. Whether or not INFFs are really, we use this awful terminology, domesticating the FFD agenda, whether or not INFFs can take the attention away from systemic issues. There is evidence that possibly this is not happening. You see the discussions on tax, very welcome discussions on tax, but there might be other discussions to be pretty soon taken as efficiently as possible, as in the case of that. So the first benchmark, whether or not INFFs are slowing the pace of systemic issues. The second benchmark is really about the inclusiveness of these conversations. As I said, we're going to look closely into the findings from this report, but there are a few facts that are disturbing at the global level. From OECD DAC, we learned that about 70% ODA is going to countries that are autocratic regimes. 70% of ODA going to autocratic regimes. And so this is telling that the practical implementation of inclusiveness is really an uphill battle. And we know from other sources that civic space is shrinking. So the level of inclusiveness is the second benchmark. And the third benchmark is about the nature of the reform processes, obviously. The 3 things are coming together, because if the reforms are inspired by countries, we can assume are good reforms. But if there is not enough of inclusiveness, we may have concerns about whether or not these reforms are serving the interest of the local community. So we have these benchmarks, and we're going to do our best to use these elements in the most constructive fashion. Let's recall, but as it's been said many times over, INFFs are part and parcel of Addis Ababa, Chapter 9, and Chapter 9 is also about the political space for countries. It's about nationally owned strategy. So, and we really would like to see more of this in Spain. Let me finish with one consideration. Over the past few days, even today, even now, there's been a lot of references to effectiveness. From the effectiveness community, it's quite obvious that this is very important. We noticed that in the outcome document this year, effectiveness is not properly referred to because there might have been some issues, terminology about revitalizing effectiveness. We know that there is this conversation underway. And the CSO community would like to be involved. We have a GPDC partnership, can be the right place, but we understand that it's time to bring together all bits and pieces that are related to effectiveness. My overarching final comment is that from the CSO community in general, we think systemic issues is the big challenge for next year, reviewing the governance of many areas of FFD and also the governance of developed cooperation to create more space for countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Luca. It was a rich discussion. And to help us digest this, I'll turn to Antti, the long-standing champion of the INFF's approach, Antti Kurnan from the European Commission Director for Sustainable Finance, to close this rich discussion up and to help us to digest.
Thank you very, very much, and it's a great honor and a pleasure to give some brief, and I promise to be very brief, closing remarks to this extremely interesting event. First, it has been so enriching to hear from you, dear ministers, from the pioneering countries of INFF, Maldives, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Commissioner Bate from Tanzania. You have engaged firsthand on the INFF process, and you already have implemented your own sovereign strategies and made some notable success and progress. So congratulations for that, and thank you for letting us know your stories. Second, equally has been great to hear from Karsten and from Shari and Oria, your insights, colleagues from UN and OECD, on what your impressions are of where we are with the INFFs, and I'm hearing positive things. Thank you, Luca, for your very knowledgeable CSO perspective that is highly valued. And thank you so much, Sergio, for providing setting the scene, giving us your perspectives on INFS, most interestingly, of course, about the road towards the FFD Forum, which we are all expecting and looking forward with huge interest. So as we've heard, INFFs have shown to be a great success so far, and a steady growing number of countries are using the INFF approach to develop a sovereign financing strategy for both their national development plan and their climate and environmental targets. And it's great, Tom, that we have now a report showing where we stand, and I think that's very helpful and timely at the moment when we are kicking off to prepare for the FFD FFD Forum process. So impressive and useful. I've taken a look at the report already before it came out, and I know it's quality stuff, worth reading, everybody. For us as EU, we will happily continue to support INFFs. It fits very, very well to EU's Global Gateway Strategy, which is a bold 300 billion investment and investment climate strategy where sustainable finance plays a big role, and so that's a perfect place to also apply INFFs. So let me just finish. I think we would all like to give a great applause, Marcos, to you also personally for bringing us where we are today. It's great success. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming and read the report. Oh, there's a question. Sorry. Well,
good afternoon. Hi, my name is Gail Davis, and I work with a few NGOs, and I also volunteer on climate finance. I'd just like to leave one statement. There are countries, as the gentleman spoke earlier, okay, that are in the poorest top 10 or considered top 10, right? I'd like to ask the question if GDP, if they have a high GDP, okay, And I don't know if this is a dumb question, but I'll ask anyway. Can a GDP ever be used, a high GDP ever be used with a private sectorial company for return on investment, for any investments that are put into the country in general? Just a question.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. It's 3 p.m. We are already very late. Thanks for coming.